This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Good to have you with us this morning. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kischer. We're talking immigration law with, the principals from Maynard, Kischer, Stojicevic, immigration law firm here in Vancouver, downtown at 1168 Hamilton Street, and online at vancouverlaw.ca. Gordon, you went through the entire, we're talking inadmissibility issues on this episode of The Law Show. Basically, who gets to come into our country and who gets tossed and why? And Gordon, you identified the 9 major category headings the Immigration Department uses as reasons for disallowing entry into this country. But let's zoom in on a couple of them. Let's talk about health grounds because, Rudy, we'll talk to you first about this because, again, maybe it's just an urban myth, but this is the one in which a lot of people get their backs up because they see us being taken advantage of by people bringing family members in from the old country who are, in some cases, medically compromised and who are going to take advantage of our generosity and our medical system. Is that the case usually when one is denied admission on health grounds?
Yeah, I think there might be a misperception out there. The Act definitely sets up a grounds for what we call medically inadmissibility, where you're not allowed to come into Canada because you have a medical condition that they believe will cause an excessive expense to the Canadian government on either health services, medical services, or social services.
Okay.
So a person can be denied. They want to come to Canada. For example, you're sponsoring your mother or grandmother, and they will have to do a medical. They do the medical usually overseas at a doctor that's been designated by the Immigration Department. That resultant comes back and shows that the person has maybe some sort of kidney function or very severe diabetes or is due for a heart operation soon. That person, if it's believed by the doctor that it'll go over a certain threshold, the threshold being about $6,000 annually for a 5-year period, if they look at that and say, well, that heart operation is going to cost, $60,000 or whatever it's going to be if you stay in the hospital, we're going to deny you entry to Canada as a permanent resident, despite the fact that your child is here and sponsoring you, has been living in Canada for a long time. Now, there is an appeal for that. So at the appeal level, the person will be allowed to go to the Immigration Appeal Division and have a hearing in which a tribunal member will look at it and weigh the facts. Well, what is mom's condition like? How severe is it? Is this medical information accurate? And finally, what are the humanitarian compassion factors? Does she have 5 daughters living with her, overseas, and therefore she has other people to be with? Or does she only have 1 child and 1 grandchild, and that 1 grandchild and child are here in Canada?
Right.
Where is she living? What is the care for old people? For example, in Iran, care for people outside the family for women is horrible. It's horrendous. There really isn't old age homes for old age. They're expected to be with the family member, and therefore there's not a lot of options for that. So the board will take a look at that and weigh that on humanitarian compassion grounds and decide who gets in. But there are circumstances where the entire medical issue is waived. And for example, if you're a permanent resident and you're sponsoring, you fall in love with a foreigner, you've married them, and you want them to come to Canada, if they have severe medical issues, those grounds are automatically waived. They used to not be waived up until about 2002, but the finding was that if it's your spouse, to separate you from your spouse as a Canadian, because somebody has health issues, would be too severe. And so for spousal and dependent children, those medical requirements are now waived.
But back to the matter of bringing grandma in from the old country, and if she is medically compromised and likely to cost the medical system more than $30,000 over the next 5 years, but Junior, her son who's sponsoring her to come in, says, "Look, I get that, but I'm doing okay. And I will assume full financial responsibility for any medical costs my mom incurs when she comes to Canada. She will not become a burden on the state, and that, I understand, was the point of denial. We don't want these people coming in becoming burdens on the state. So her kid says, I'll pay the shot, no problem. What's the decision there?
Sterling, that is a very good issue you bring up, and that's one of the first things that the clients, when I have a situation like this arise, clients raise, we'll pay for this.
Sure.
We know she has a condition. We've got the money. We'll sign anything you want. That in medical circumstances, the Supreme Court of Canada has looked at it and says, we have a universal healthcare system. You can't opt out. right? There's no way for you to sign a document that we could enforce that say your grandmother's not going to get medical treatment here, and therefore we will not consider that. So there are ways, and you know, if you go to a lawyer, if you have a circumstance with medical intimacy, I 100% say you should go get legal advice.
Sounds like it, yeah.
There are ways to sort of strategize on this and think, well, does she need if she needs a heart operation and she's immigrating, why don't we get the heart operation done now? Get it in the country where she's in.
Sure.
And so we've paid for the expense
bring her over.
overseas.
She can recuperate.
She can recuperate. The cost is not a lot, but the operation's been done.
Sure.
We do that for knee operations, hip operations. We've seen a lot of clients do that. Let's get that operation done now, and then we go for the medical exam and say, well, you just had the knee operation. There's no big expense coming up, none planned. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what other are those the primary reasons, the health reasons, Rudy, that people are denied entry into Canada?
Well, you can also be denied, some of the saddest cases we see is medical inadmissibility for a dependent family member. So somebody maybe has been working in Canada for 4 or 5 years or applying to immigrate to Canada, and their child has a disability. You know, they may be, for example, they may be deaf, they may have developmental delay, and in those cases, and sometimes people are unaware, the fact that their child has this condition that they're living with and fine with, that may make them medically inadmissible. So somebody who's got great potential for Canada, could contribute a lot to Canadian society. Unfortunately, because of their family member, we find them inadmissibility. And those are very hard cases.
Social services costs, not necessarily health costs.
Right.
But the social services costs associated with the disability.
And now there's more flexibility on that because social services aren't necessarily a universal right. If the family has means, then we can try and make arrangements where we can prove, and some of the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, and we've had other cases like this where, if someone's going to keep their child in private school, for example, they've had them in private school before they came to Canada, they come to Canada, they put them in private school and they cover all the expenses, well, then you have a case to say, listen, there's no expense here. There's no medical expense to this child. The social services costs we're paying, and we've always paid. We paid it in our home country. They were always in private school.
The same here.
And we have the means to do that. Here's my bank statement. I can pay for that. Here's the plan. And when this child turns 18, I've got enough money in a trust fund set up, and then we can look at those cases, and then you have an argument to overcome that.
Maybe also comment, Rudy, if you don't mind, on the whole process of sponsoring parents and the timeline there and how that plays into the medical inadmissibility.
Okay, good. And this is important stuff, too.
Well, I mean, what we've seen when I started practicing over a decade ago, you'd make a parental application, they would come in 2 years. That was, a reasonable time someone could plan their life, and you'd have an idea of what their health situation was going to be like, although things did come up. But what we're seeing now is processing times are going 5, 6, depending on what country, 6, 7 years, 8 years. So you sponsor, your mother when she's, 70. By the time she's getting here and she's doing her medical, she's 78. Well, what are the chances of not having health issues at that point, right? It's likely that some sort of condition has come up, and this is becoming more prevalent.
Some people might even suspect that the delay is deliberate.
By the way, just we need to take another break, and then I want to talk with Gordon about residency requirements. But I've got to ask you this. We're talking health issues here and reasons for denying people admission to Canada. Where does pregnancy factor into all of this?
Yeah, well, it's this is a conservative bone of contention. The government has talked a lot about this. We have cases where people actually fly to Canada to have babies in Canada, and this is more of a citizenship case. So there are cases every year, and there was a business out of Korea that would book these flights where people could come and have a baby in Canada, and they were coming as a tourist. At the end of that, when the child's born here, that child's actually a Canadian citizen.
Absolutely, you bet.
And that upsets a lot of people because what is really their connection to Canada? So there's a lot of debate about whether that should be allowed. The government has backed off on that right now and has not said they're planning to make any changes to that because the amount of people that actually do this is very small.
Okay.
But that doesn't make somebody medically inadmissible. If they show up, I've had clients, they show up at the border, they declare that they're pregnant, and I'm having a baby here, but we've booked a room at St. Paul's Hospital. We're paying for it privately. We're going to pay $10,000. We've booked it. Here's the money. Here's the booking with St. Paul's Hospital. They're allowed in. It doesn't make them medically inadmissible.
Interesting stuff. Well, the reasons why people are allowed into Canada, and in some cases, the reasons we toss people out of our country. We're talking immigration law. Our guests from Maynard, Kischer, Stojicevic in Vancouver, Gordon Maynard, and Rudy Kischer. And we're back with our final segment already. My gosh, what's happened to this hour? We'll talk residency requirements and immigration after this quick timeout.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.